friends, and welcome to another outstanding installment from very high above all the voluminously vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. Well, if you haven't heard the news already, my pal Rebecca has decided to run for governor as the Constitution Party's candidate. She joined me on this morning's edition of Cowboy State Politics Live to talk about this endeavor. In a few minutes, I'm going to play that interview for you. But first, let's get some coordinates around this entire thing. The Constitution Party is a minor party in Wyoming, which there are two major parties, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, who have to nominate their nominee for office in a primary election. As we all know, from every news outlet in the state, well, every one of them except for this one, if you want to infiltrate the Republican Party and vote for the most liberal candidate humanly possible, during that election anyway, then you have to do that by May 13th, or today. Of course, I'm referring to the practice of crossover voting. That is, lying about who you really are and pretending to be somebody else so that your vote can actually mean something. And you would have to do that because the Democrat Party in Wyoming has alienated every reasonable person that would even think about being a member of their leftist organization. One caveat here, generally speaking, if you are a member of the current Democrat Party, you're probably not a reasonable individual. Again, generally speaking, reasonable people are not in favor of hacking off perfectly good body parts to try to change your gender in a ridiculous attempt to become something that it is impossible for you to be, or that we should leave the gate open at our southern border, or that illegal immigrants are just like you and me. We could go on for an entire afternoon talking about the ridiculous ideas of the current Democrat Party, but the point is that those people who are in the Democrat Party of today are either blissfully unaware of their party's positions or they are fundamentalist wackos that we all know them to be. It is the current Democrat Party in Wyoming that ruined a pretty long and very depressing history of electoral victories in the Cowboy State. From 1975 till 2011, there was only one Republican governor. But we could make a pretty solid argument that Jim Geringer definitely does not fit the definition of a Republican. And as far as that one goes, obviously, the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. If you consider Jim Geringer's policies, the state of Wyoming was led from 1975 till 2011 by very Democrat-minded governors. So the question is, how could they go from what is pretty much a 36-year history of running the state to barely being able to qualify as a major political party in a short span of 10 years? If Democrats were honest with themselves, they would arrive at the same conclusion that the rest of us have, that once the internet became widely available to just about everybody, Wyoming voters discovered exactly who the Democrat Party is, and they registered as Republican. And if you add on top of it the practice of crossover voting, it creates a situation where just about everybody has to run as a Republican to win an election, because that's where the Wyoming electorate is at. Most people are conservative. And that's the phrase that they use, as a Republican. News outlets don't say that Joe Smith is a Republican. They say that Joe Smith is running as a Republican. They may as well just say that they identify as a Republican. That would be more accurate considering the current Democrat Party ethos. So if I'm correct, which I almost always am, and the majority of Wyoming voters are generally conservative, then how did we end up with very liberal people like Matt Mead and Mark Gordon? Well, that's pretty easy. And Republicans always do this. You get more than one conservative in the race and one liberal guy. The conservative vote gets split, and we end up with Mark Gordon. who won his first election with 33% of the vote. The guy before him, Matt Mead, won with only 27% of the vote. Now, of course, I'm referring to victories in the primary election because shortly after 2011, the jig was up for the Democrat Party in Wyoming. The Democrats discovered that if they wanted to win an election and they lived outside of a Democrat stronghold, that it was much easier to run as a Republican than to just be honest and be a Democrat. So here we are in 2026. Right now, we've got three people who have said they're running for governor, only one of which is actually a conservative. The other two, well, they're pretty much Mark Gordon clones. Now, don't get me wrong. What Megan Degenfelder says sounds way more conservative than anything that could come out of Mark Gordon's mouth. But it's her voting record that matters. And that, my friends, no matter how much her supporters try to explain it away, shows her to be playing patty cake with Mark Gordon. For now, almost 4 years into her first term as the superintendent of public instruction, her voting record on the State Lands Board, with very, very few exceptions, falls right in line with Mark Gordon's. So, if history is any guide, and it almost always is, you can expect a very similar administration to the one that we have right now. Now, Eric Barlow, that one's easy. That guy's a raging Democrat masquerading as a Republican. He is a straight-up redcoat. In his years in the Wyoming legislature, his voting record shows that he votes with the Democrats over 80% of the time. 80, as in 80. No doubt about it, that guy's a Democrat. So the Wyoming Democrat Party would be satisfied with either one of those two. Now, the other guy, Brent Bean, he's the only conservative in the race. I've known him for several years, and I've never really heard anything but conservatism come out of his mouth. Granted, not to the impeccable standards of conservatism on this program, but way better than the other two. When it comes to the election, there's a pretty high chance that one of the two not-so-conservative people win. Which brings us to Rebecca Bextel's announcement this morning. The Constitution Party, being a minor party in Wyoming, doesn't hold a primary election, and Constitution Party candidates do not appear on the primary election ballot. They don't even have to file for office until August 17th, the day before the Republican and Democrat primary election. So there's no possibility of adding to the vote-splitting problem. That being said, whomever wins the Republican and Democrat primary election for governor still has to face each other in the general election. And that's Bextel's point with this whole thing. If the vote-splitting problem happens, as it often does in Wyoming, more than likely you'd end up with the liberal Republican. Now, I happen to think that Brent Bean has just as much chance as the other two, and he's campaigning just as hard as Eric Barlow is. So even though the Wyoming conventional wisdom is that one of the two liberals will win, and by the way, I'm so sick of hearing that, I can hardly stand it. But anyway, the filing period hasn't even begun yet. It doesn't open until tomorrow, and it's a long ways until August. What I'm saying is, it's an election, and anything can happen. Talk to me at the beginning of July, and I may see things differently. But right now, I say it's anybody's game. And frankly, anybody that tells you different is just flat wrong. In just a minute, I'm going to play the interview with Rebecca that we did this morning on the live program. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. Today's edition of Cowboy State Politics is brought to you by Morton Buildings. Today, at Cowboy State Politics headquarters, it's supposed to be around 90 degrees. That's 90, my friends. And when it's that hot, you typically don't start thinking about that white crap that happens so often in Wyoming. It was only 2 weeks ago that it was snowing, and all of your stuff was out in it. Now, don't make the same mistake you did last time. Call Marcos and Jesse at 307-674-2532, and they can build you a building to protect your things while you're deluding yourself that this warm weather will last forever. Call Morton Buildings. Again, 307-674-2532. And after you do that, then you can go play in the 90-degree weather. The following ad was paid for by Brent Bean for governor.
You won't find him leading a horse out of a barn or leaning against a corral with the sun setting behind him. because Wyomingites don't need a candidate who creates a good photo op. What you will find is a hard-working, experienced leader who believes Wyoming should always come first. A conservative grounded in strong values and steady principles. Ready to lead Wyoming the right way. Brent Behan for governor.
And by the way, this is a good time to give you my election proviso. I don't endorse candidates on Cowboy State Politics. I would never try to insult your intelligence and tell you who to vote for. If you hear a political ad on the show, that's exactly what it is. An advertisement that I got paid to play. Today's edition of Cowboy State Politics is also brought to you by the Buffalo Wool Company. Most people don't know that you can wear wool in the summer and it will keep your feet cool and dry even on those 90-degree days. And I'm telling you, these are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. You definitely won't be disappointed. And now, back to the program. That being said, this morning I had Rebecca Bextel on Cowboy State Politics Live to make her announcement that she's running for governor under the Constitution Party. Here's that interview. The history of Wyoming's gubernatorial races is interesting. And, you know, for the last, last 3 governors, I mean, it really ends up being that you get a couple people that are running, and then a third one enters the race. And in the case of, Harriet Hageman and her race with Foster Freeze and Sam Galeotis and Mark Gordon, there were a lot of people in there. And what ends up happening is the vote gets split, and generally speaking, we get the liberal guy or gal, and we're just kind of stuck with them. But that's what happened with Matt Mead. He got. I think his first primary, he got something like 27% of the vote. And then 8 years of him. And then Mark Gordon, he got about 33-ish percent of the vote. And we've had him for 8 years. And I really don't think that the majority of Wyoming citizens are as liberal as our governors would lead you to believe. I really don't think that that's the case. And here's the reason I say that. I mean, if you're going to live in Wyoming, you're going to put up with, usually, not this winter, but usually you're going to put up with about 8 months of snow. The only reason you would do that is that you want to be left alone. And I really think that that's where the majority of Wyoming citizens are. And to do that, you got to be kind of a conservative person. You got to be self-reliant. You probably vote with your checkbook most of the time. But the problem is that we have a media that is entirely owned by the left. And so most people, when somebody shows up on their doorstep and they say, hey, I love my guns, taxes are too high, abortion's bad, I'm a conservative and you should vote for me. Well, most people do. And, it tends to be just the Republican ticket. And, a lot of times, as we are seeing right now, there's a huge effort out there to convince people to register as Republicans so they can vote in the Republican primary. So it's a huge problem. And, if we're ever going to have a conservative governor, maybe we got to do something about it. So joining me on the program is my friend, my business partner, sponsor of the program, Rebecca Bextel. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Good morning, David. Thank you for having me.
Well, of course. So how are we doing this morning? Looks like it's a beautiful day in Jackson.
It is a beautiful day in Jackson. Absolutely nice and warm.
So what are we looking at behind you?
Oh, my office is on Snow King Mountain. So that's just the lifts. And in the winter, people snow tube right outside this door here. And you can see people skiing down. But right now, people are out there hiking.
Ah, okay. Well, it's beautiful. Of course, Ken and I just got back from there yesterday. But it's been beautiful weather. So I understand it that you've got a little announcement to make. So
Yes.
why don't you talk to me about it? Tell me what you're up to, and what is this big announcement that you've been keeping us all in the dark about?
Well, I don't know how well of a secret it's been. Wyoming could be arguably worse than Alabama as far as keeping a secret. But basically, I resigned yesterday as a Teton County GOP state committee woman, and I registered as a constitutional party candidate, and I'm seeking the nomination for governor from the Constitution.
Whoa.
And the reason I'm doing this, and I've been very vocal about my support for Megan. I think she'll make a great governor. I think Brent would make an excellent governor and Susan an excellent governor's wife. Please hear me say, I hope they win. I hope that I am not the governor. I hope I'm not our future governor. But what's happening is every election, we just keep getting, I don't know if I want to say outsmarted, but just like you were saying, I didn't hear everything that you and Kim were talking about. But we constantly have a governor that doesn't reflect the values of the average Wyoming citizen. And by the time the primary happens on August 18th, it's too late for anybody else to run or to jump in the race. And so what I'm doing is trying to be a little more proactive. On August 18th, I hope we find out that Megan's the nominee or Brent's the nominee. But if not, I'm ready to be in the 2-month fight of my life to take out one of the most corrupt candidates we've ever seen within the Republican Party, and that's Eric Barlow. So the only opponent I have is Eric Barlow.
So that's big news. So you're okay. So tell me how this is going to work.
Okay.
So you, as an independent candidate, you don't have to actually file until the day before the primary. So are you going to campaign during the summer, or what are you going to do?
I'm going to be living my great life here in Teton County and just hammering Eric Barlow. Basically, you cannot change your party affiliation after May 13th. So
Which
today,
is today, right?
And if you were running for the primary in the Republican Party, you would have until May 28th to declare that. But because the Constitution Party is a minor party, they have a state convention. This year it's on June 18th and 19th. And they actually nominate their candidates. And those candidates go straight on the general ballot in November. So I can't even take away votes from Megan. You can't choose me over Brent or Megan in the primary. Basically, if Eric Barlow is the nominee, and if he is, David, we need to start realizing that the Republican system is failing us. If someone like Eric Barlow, who votes with the Democrats most of the time, if that's who is the Republican nominee, then we have a problem. And so I think that it's time to start voting on candidates based on their merit, their values, what they stand for, not the letter by their name. And if you go to RebeccaForWyoming.com, I spell it out about people like Eli Bebout, okay? He actually got elected as a Democrat in the House. Then he switched to the Republican Party just so he could be Speaker of the House. In other words, it doesn't seem to have come from a place of conviction. He didn't have an eye-opening experience where he realized, abortion's wrong, or he wants to protect the country with a border, or he has Second Amendment right convictions. Just he made a strategic decision to become a Republican to try to be the Speaker of the House. Then he decided to run for governor with that same R by his name. And amazingly, twice as many bodies voted for Eli Bebout in the primary for the Republican Party as they did for Freudenthal, who ended up winning the Democratic nomination. And then Freudenthal won in the general. So the primary in Wyoming is a bunch of shenanigans. We constantly have two conservatives splitting the ticket, then we hand it to someone like Governor Gordon, and then we have to squeak it out for 8 years. Or we hand it to someone like Governor Meade with 27.4%. Not even a third of the state wanted him to be the governor. But then we are sitting there for 8 years while he doesn't reflect the values of Wyoming. So my campaign is Rebecca Bextel for governor. Literally, my tagline is an insurance policy against Eric Barlow. That's all this says.
Okay, so I'm flabbergasted. I mean, I knew you told me you had an announcement to make, but I think it's an interesting idea. But how are you going to overcome just before we came on, before we started this interview, I was discussing how, a lot of people, they just see that R and they just vote straight down the ticket, which I think is, that's one of the big problems we have, and crossover voting contributes to that. But how are you going to overcome the practice of just voting for the Republican? Because on the ballot, it'll be, whomever, Eric Barlow, Republican, and then it'll be Constitution Party, Rebecca Bextel. How are you going to overcome that Republican thing?
We literally have a conservative registering as a constitutional party candidate because the Democrats have taken over the Republican Party. We have, my friend Roxy sent me this thing yesterday with Chris Rothfuss, the Democrat senator, literally telling the Democrats to go register as Republicans, bring their woke pen, bring their Antifa gear, bring their rainbow flags, and they're proudly basically trying to influence our election. That's what they're doing. And so if the Republican nominee is Eric Barlow, who is really a Democrat, then surely people can get over the R, because the R is just a token. It means nothing. Someone asked me, this is going to make people question my allegiance to the Republican Party, my loyalty to the Republican Party. I'm not loyal to a name. I'm loyal to the values that the Republican Party stands for: the right to life, Second Amendment rights, limited government, the values that stand for the Republican Party. And you can have those values in the Constitutional Party. So I'll be honest, I am not loyal to the Republican Party if the person with the R by their name is Eric Barlow, or frankly, Governor Gordon. He's not a Republican. And so this is not about trying to take out Megan. I hope this helps Megan. I hope this helps Brent. The only opponent is Eric Barlow if it comes to that.
Do you think that this might have a chill on fundraising for those two candidates? Either, the two that you mentioned. I'm not, you and I differ on one of them. But do you think that, people might look at this and say, well, Rebecca's going to be in the general. Why donate money to either one of those two candidates? Do you see that as an issue going forward?
I don't want them to not fund these candidates. Don't fund me. I don't need any money. I'm still going to try to raise money for the right candidates. I hope we can clean out the Senate. I hope we can clean out the House and keep the majority of conservatives in the House. There are so many individuals in that Senate that need to go, starting with Ogden Driscoll. Okay, I hope everyone read my piece on the open letter to Ogden Driscoll. I wrote a piece a while back called The Living Dead. It was about the living dead in the Senate. These are just like the zombie apocalypse. These people like Stephen Pappas and Bill Landon that seem to have Dan Dockstetter. Okay, Dan Dockstetter's wife supported his entire campaign. There's no momentum behind these people. Somehow they just reappear every year in Cheyenne and vote against the best will of their constituents, not even in the best interest, not how their constituents want them to vote. And we just keep putting up with it. And something else I noticed is we just hope for the best. We're going to have two conservatives run against Eric Barlow. You'll have people say, well, the polling shows. I don't care what the polling shows. I've tried to talk myself out of this 100 times, but at the end of the day, I had to say, what am I going to feel like when they pulled the wool over us again and Eric Barlow is the nominee? Then we are basically stuck with a Democrat for governor again.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen, folks.
And to be very clear, Eric Barlow's legislative career shows him voting with the Democrats an average of about 80% of the time.
Yeah.
And it goes up and down every year, but the majority of the time, every year that he's been in the legislature, he has voted with the Democrats most of the time. Well, Rebecca, I got to tell you, it's an interesting idea. I definitely innovative. Is there anybody else that's seeking the nomination from the Constitution Party?
Not to my knowledge. And they'll have to register by today if they want to try to square off with me. Look, I've spent a couple of months trying to find a better candidate than me. This was not my dream job, but we had to have somebody that's got name recognition. Thanks to my constitutional right to give a legal campaign donation, they blew me up. So we needed someone who can raise money in a pinch. If Eric Barlow is the nominee, it's going to be a 2-month scramble to try to educate Wyoming voters about what that R means, which is essentially nothing if it's beside Eric Barlow's name. you're not going to outwork me, Eric. If I come at you in 2 months, you are not going to outwork me, okay? And I spent a lot of time praying about this. I want to thank the people out there that have been praying really hard that the right thing will get done here. Please hear me say the opposition is not Brent Bean. It is not Megan Degenfelder. It is Eric Barlow.
Okay. All right. Well, that's
it's harder. It's time to work smarter, trying to get strategic.
Well, I think you probably have the headlines for today, and I guess keep us posted on what's going to happen. And there will be a piece on the Open Range Record here pretty directly. So anyway, thank you for joining the program, Rebecca. If people want to, why don't you say your website again? So if people want to find out more information.
It's RebeccaForWyoming.com. And like I said, I'll be in Casper this weekend, busting the low-income housing scam. It's business as usual for me. I'm the insurance policy against Eric Barlow. Thank you, David. Thank you, Wyoming.
Thank you, Rebecca. Have a good afternoon. And I guess I'll be watching the news. Take care. Sounds like this election is going to be a little bit more interesting than others. Well, that'll do it for today's installment of the broadcast. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk again on Saturday during Weekend Update. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.